On October 27th, the Russian Federation announced a domestic security policy change, a development many analysts interpret as beneficial to Ukraine. This shift is not occurring in a vacuum. It appears to be the direct result of two distinct pressures: an ongoing strategic air campaign by Ukrainian forces aimed at Russia's economy, and a financially unsustainable manpower bill, reportedly costing $24 million per day in signing bonuses alone. Together, these factors have compelled the Kremlin to publicly acknowledge a vulnerability and introduce a new, controversial policy. The backdrop for Moscow's announcement is a highly effective and persistent Ukrainian operation. This campaign employs long-range uncrewed aerial vehicles, or UAVs, and missile systems. These strikes have been carried out systematically, apparently to capitalize on gaps in Russian air defenses. Ukrainian drones have repeatedly penetrated Russian airspace, often in the pre-dawn hours, to strike high-value targets. The main objective is clearly the degradation of Russia's warfighting economy. There is a specific focus on energy and fuel infrastructure, with oil refineries, crucial fuel storage depots, and transport pipelines designated as priority targets. The operational impact has been considerable. These precision strikes have caused massive explosions, leading to large-scale fires that reportedly burn for days and consume vast amounts of fuel. The cumulative effect of this systematic aerial campaign has clearly moved beyond a simple tactical annoyance. It has inflicted substantial economic damage and triggered a deepening domestic fuel crisis inside Russia. Multiple regions report fuel shortages, long lines, and purchase caps. Some have shut down completely. This situation has resulted in extremely high fuel prices in the affected areas, which in turn directly impacts logistics, industry, and the general population. So far, Russian air defense networks have been largely unable to neutralize this persistent, low-cost threat. By 10 a.m. on October 27th, the Russian Ministry of Defense held a public briefing to address this escalating internal crisis. In a televised statement, Vice Admiral Vladimir Tsimlyansky, who serves as the Deputy Chief of the main Organizational and Mobilization Directorate and is essentially Russia's head of conscription, announced a new initiative. The Vice Admiral stated, quote, "In order to increase the level of security for critical infrastructure and other facilities vital to the well-being of citizens, a decision has been made to engage the most prepared and patriotic citizens in carrying out measures to protect civilian facilities deep in Russia's territory." This statement indicates that Ukrainian attacks are now seen as a serious threat to domestic stability. It is forcing the Ministry of Defense to divert manpower that might have been destined for the front line toward homeland defense instead. Vice Admiral Tsimlyansky provided more details, explaining that these reservists would first receive specialized training before any deployment. He specified that the new draft law, quote, "clarifies the purposes for which reservists are used, providing for the possibility of sending them to special training camps to protect vital infrastructure, energy, transport, oil refineries, and other infrastructure only in their region." This public admission is a sharp deviation from the Kremlin's established communication strategy. For over 2.5 years, the official state narrative, broadcast relentlessly by state-owned media, has projected an image of stability and success. The consistent message has been that the special military operation is going as planned. The Russian economy has successfully withstood Western sanctions, and Ukrainian forces are on the back foot. By admitting openly that its critical infrastructure is at risk and that current defenses are not enough to stop Kiev's drone strikes, the Kremlin is implicitly acknowledging that Ukraine's campaign has had operational effects. This move implies that the economic damage and the strain on domestic resources are now too large to be hidden by state propaganda. The announcement itself appears to be a political maneuver, crafted to frame the solution, which is the call-up of reservists, as a patriotic, civilian-led effort, rather than a failure of the state's military. The Kremlin seemed keenly aware that this announcement could be seen as a new wave of mobilization, which is a deeply unpopular idea in Russia. Vice Admiral Tsimlyansky spent a significant part of his speech drawing a clear line between this new reservist category and active duty contract soldiers. I would like to point out that it is important not to confuse reservists with contract soldiers, who are active military personnel. Symlyansky emphasized. The main difference between reservists and contract soldiers is that they can combine their time in the reserve with their primary employment. Reservists are not military personnel and have all the rights of civilians. Based on this official definition, these individuals are citizens with prior military service who have voluntarily signed a contract to join the reserves. They are intended to act as a part-time domestic guard force. They would keep their civilian jobs and rights, and their only task would be to defend high-value locations inside their home regions. Symlyansky was explicit, stating, quote, "The draft law does not affect all citizens and does not facilitate their conscription into military service to special military operation zones or deployment outside the country. Moreover, there is no talk of mobilization." Despite these public guarantees, military and strategic analysts view this initiative as a multi-layered operation. They suspect it has undisclosed goals that go far beyond simple domestic infrastructure protection. This assessment is based on three main factors: historical precedent, ambiguous rhetoric, and financial unsustainability. First, there is a history of terminological deception. Independent analysis often highlights the Kremlin's documented use of precise, weaponized language to hide its true intentions. The term special military operation is the prime example, used to frame a full-scale invasion as a limited police action. Likewise, repeated pre-war claims from officials, like former EU Ambassador Vladimir Chizhov's statement in January 2022 that Russia has no plans to invade, are used as evidence that official statements cannot be taken at face value. Therefore, the repeated, strong insistence that this is not mobilization is seen by many analysts as a preemptive propaganda move to manage public skepticism, not as a binding promise. Second is the rhetorical loophole. A rhetorical and domestic legal gap appears to exist. The new draft law supposedly restricts these reservists to deployment within Russia. However, President Vladimir Putin has, on many occasions, redefined what Russia includes. His statement at the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum on June 20th of this year is often pointed to, where he said, quote, "I have said many times that I consider the Russian and Ukrainian peoples to be one people. In this sense, all of Ukraine is ours." This, along with the formal annexation of occupied Ukrainian regions, provides a domestically framed but internationally unrecognized justification for the Kremlin to send these domestic reservists to active combat zones in Ukraine, all under the pretense of defending Russian territory. Third, and perhaps most critical, is the unsustainable financial driver. The core reason behind this new strategy is assessed to be financial. The Kremlin's current model for generating manpower, which depends on offering massive financial incentives to attract contract soldiers, known as kontraktniki, is becoming financially crippling. A comprehensive report from Russia, published earlier this year, detailed the staggering costs. In the first 6 months of 2025 alone, Russia spent just over $24.6 billion on manpower. This figure included $9.7 billion on service pay for active duty soldiers, $8.4 billion in compensation to the families of wounded and killed soldiers, and $4.5 billion on one-time signing bonuses for new recruits. Analysts estimate that Russia is spending approximately $24 million, or 2 billion rubles, every single day just on signing bonuses to keep recruitment levels stable. As the war nears its fourth year, and with casualties estimated by some Western sources to be approaching 500,000, this level of spending is judged to be unsustainable. The Russian economy, which is already battered by sanctions, high inflation, and now the direct loss of energy revenue from Ukrainian strikes, simply can no longer afford to buy its army. This financial breakdown is directly supported by a recent assessment from the US-based Institute for the Study of War. In a report titled "Warning, the Kremlin is preparing to mobilize reservists on a rolling basis to fight in Ukraine for the first time," the ISW offers a stark analysis of the new draft law. The ISW notes that Russia's main method for generating manpower is reportedly losing momentum and hitting diminishing returns as of October 2025. Recruitment offices are reportedly failing to meet their quotas, even with escalating financial offers. The ISW concludes that the Kremlin has been quietly building a strategic reserve, which totals a claimed 292,000 personnel. This new draft amendment, they assess, may provide the legal mechanism to activate elements of this reserve. The institute assesses this law could permit the Kremlin to deploy active reservists into combat more rapidly than was possible under the previous mechanism that required a formal declaration of war or mobilization order. Most importantly, this new method allows the Ministry of Defense to generate forces far more cheaply. It enables them to bypass the massive signing bonuses and high contract salaries that are currently draining the federal budget. This new reservist initiative puts the Kremlin in a precarious strategic position. It is now walking a dangerous tightrope between what it sees as military necessity and the need for domestic political stability. The final outcome will depend on the true, unstated purpose of this new law. On one hand, if the reservists are genuinely limited to defending domestic infrastructure, the initiative is unlikely to succeed. Ukrainian forces have consistently shown they can identify and bypass static, predictable Russian air defense positions. Static guarding is unlikely to deter or defeat sophisticated drone swarm attacks. In this scenario, the move would prove to be a pointless reallocation of manpower, failing to stop the economic damage and potentially just leading to more casualties. On the other hand, if, as the financial data and ISW analysis suggest, this framework is actually a covert mechanism for deploying reservists to combat zones in Ukraine, the Kremlin risks a significant domestic political backlash. Compulsory military service is still a deeply controversial topic. The Kremlin's main political risk is failing to convince the Russian population that these deployments are voluntary. If the public comes to see this as a perceived de facto mobilization, it could trigger the very domestic resentment and dissent that President Putin has, until now, managed to suppress.